Hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I'm gonna wait a minute to see if to wait for people to pop on in, of course. I'm just sitting here drinking some tea and vibing, I guess. I hope you're all doing well. And I hope that you are gearing up for the holidays, of course. Arby's here, Tiffany's here. Yay, it's good to see you guys. That is exciting. Um, so, yes, tea, like tea is getting me through the evening. I'm just being honest. So, uh, I have been really looking forward to tonight for a good month. Well, obviously, since my collection Feats of Alchemy came out, I've been very eager to share and perform some of these pieces for you. If you follow my poetry channel here, you probably have seen some of those poems performed. You'll be hearing some of them again tonight, but you will also be hearing some ones that you haven't heard from the book. So I'm really excited. Um, I wanted to begin tonight by talking a little bit about how surreal the past year and a half has been for me. I Toward the latter half of finishing Carbon Footprint, started working on my second collection because I noticed a theme taking place and beginning, and after the success of my first book, it became very much apparent to me that I needed to create a follow-up collection. So I do believe that while Feats of Alchemy stands on its own, it does pick up where Carbon Footprint leaves off of sorts. So I would say that Carbon Footprint is largely about my experiences as a gay man prior to coming out, whereas Feats of Alchemy is about my experiences as a gay man post coming out, and it talks about, reflects on a little bit of those, those different challenges that a lot of LGBTQ plus people face post coming out. So Ryan's here. Um, Brotherwell Music is here. Hello, my friend. RP says, "If I missed the Q&A, could I—" Yes, of course, you can message me questions if you miss the Q&A portion. So here is how things are going to go for tonight. I have about a very brave and ambitious 13 poems selected to perform for you. So that's why I have the tea here, because I'm probably going to have a sore throat by the time I get to poem 13, but these are pieces that I just really, really wanted to read for this occasion. And I'm going to first begin, though, and this is pretty customary at a lot of poetry readings, beginning by reading a poem from another collection to celebrate someone else's work. I do want to do a plug for Susan Slaviero's book Cyborgia, which was published by Mayapple Press. My dear friend Amy Schmidt introduced me to this book and this poet, and there are many aspects of it that really inspired Feats of Alchemy. So I wanted to read my first poem tonight from this book to celebrate that. So this first piece um, by Slaviero is titled "If Snow White Were a Cyborg." Okay. If Snow White were a cyborg, this is what she'd fear. The reflective qualities of an active matrix liquid crystal display, electric combs, genetically altered apples. Her stepmother would send threatening emails or viruses to distort her profile photos on MySpace. Snow White's always had a weakness for unexpected gifts. A cybernetic corset with automatic lacing, a sleeping box of space-age polymers. Her surgeon would be bribed to cut out her mechanical heart and send it to her stepmother next day air. He'd put her up in a safe house, deliver an artificial womb instead. It's hard for the untrained eye to tell the difference. If she fell into a drug-induced coma, the dwarves would have her head cryogenically frozen, never realizing she only needed the pills dislodged from her throat to awaken. Very powerful piece. I know when I read this book for the first time, it really struck me, and I wanted to begin with that. So, before I get to reading pieces from my book, I do want to talk a little bit about Feats of Alchemy. By the way, if you have a copy on hand and you want to follow any of these poems along while I perform them, you're more than welcome to. I strongly encourage that. But Feats of Alchemy is a book that has a lot going on in it. I'm just saying, and I'm very proud of that, though. I feel like as a writer looking at this collection, it's definitely almost a niche genre, considering it is very cyberpunk and cyberqueer influenced in the sense that it incorporates a lot of sci-fi and cyberpunk influences into my commentary about LGBTQ plus issues. And the truth is, the central theme in this book reflects how I think a lot of people feel in the LGBTQ community post coming out, because we have to continually, kind of manufacture ourselves and incorporate these artificial aspects imposed on us by these different spaces that we have no choice but to inhabit in order to fit into groups of people, to be accepted, to not be feared or it be in danger sometimes. And that's why I got really caught up in the concept of the cyborg, because the cyborg is not just something that is cybernetic, it's also alive, right? Like, it's a mixture of cybernetic aspects and biological aspects. And metaphorically speaking, that's something that I really resonate with. I have felt like there have been aspects of my personality or my expression that have been artificially mechanized of sorts in order to find acceptance and to, not only acceptance from other people, but acceptance within in myself ultimately. So if you, much like my first collection of poems, Feats of Alchemy is separated into 4 sections. And I did this deliberately because each section has a theme. Um, and like, honestly, it would take forever to talk about like that theme, like the theme of each section. But it's my hope that the poems will convey that. But the titles of the sections are The Involuntary Reanimation, Laboratory Specimen, Steampunk Automaton, and The Cyborg's Gone Rogue. So each section has a different function, but they all contribute to, in a way, a story about a cyborg, essentially. And I'm going to be talking a little bit about that here in just a few minutes once I get to, um, some of the poems. So the first poem that I'm going to read for you this evening is the first poem in the book itself. It's titled Resurgence, and it basically um, is the introduction to an unruly reanimation that takes place. And for me, a metaphor for coming out. Resurgence. The closet door was rolled away upon my second birth, and my remains spilled across the floor with all things kept past expiration. Clothes outgrown, wadded paper, a rusted saxophone. As the tomb of my childhood room lay splayed in its array of broken things, a silhouette loomed, reached out its skeletal hands to feel the spark left behind. By a finger flick and crafted incantation, double helixes twisted into a viscous pool, and the soot left by these bones churned into clay, a mud-caked golem shell. And it breathed life back into me, a figment of an industrial hell. And that's Resurgence. Heather's here. Hello. It's good to see you. Thank you for being here. But I felt like that poem would be a fitting beginning, starting at coming out and what coming out felt like for me, metaphorically speaking, of course. Who am I kidding? It felt like that literally too. Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that, Heather. All right. So the second piece has a very interesting backstory. This poem is titled Desperate Preservation, and it really ties back into how obsessive I was when I was a teenager. So I often would think about death, and how we as human beings are always trying to make death not look like death, right? We're trying to be like, we don't want to acknowledge death because, like, we don't want to acknowledge our own mortality. And when I was a kid, I have this very distinct memory of being so upset that leaves fell from trees that I would try to, like, tape leaves back to trees because I thought they were dying. So that is the inspiration of this poem. And it's also partially inspired by an Evanescence song, which is very dear to me, titled Even in Death, which is a very, well, I guess, fitting correlation, I would hope. Desperate preservation. A child tapes fallen leaves back to trees because he can't bear to watch them die. Dreams he kept them alive. A woman flips through smudged scrapbook pages because she kept her former lover's roses preserved in non-stick coffins. A man stuffs the dog he had for 15 years, tortured by his calculated euthanasia, all to keep his eyes open. A teenager pins the butterflies across her car's grill in boxes to keep them beautiful, imagines they still fly. The embalmer repaints, smiles on cold faces, prepares the deceased for one last performance, still presentable even in death. There's just something really, to me, dark about funerals and decorating the dead to make them look like they are still part of the world of the living, you know? So I wanted to reflect on that. Oh, thank you, Heather, and thank you, Brotherwell Music. I really appreciate that. I wanted to read this poem because I know this has been one that a lot of people love. I know Heather loves it as well, so I was like, I'm going to perform this one tonight. Why not? So, um, another thing about this collection is that because of the success of the first one, I really felt that I could take a few more risks with this collection, right? It's much more experimental. It's kind of like a melting pot of different genres in a way. And it gave me the opportunity to be extra nerdy about referencing things that are very dear to me, whether it be Tolkien's universe or Godzilla or references to Evanescence songs, a band that I am like super obsessed with, right? Or, just Star Trek. I love Star Trek, and that's definitely an influence in this. Before I read this next poem, I want to read um, the beginning quote of my collection, the epigraph of my collection. It is a quote by Ishiro Honda, who is one of the phenomenally talented minds behind the creation of the character Godzilla. So, and this quote is, monsters are tragic beings. They were born too tall, too strong, too heavy. They are not evil by choice, and that is their tragedy. So, with that thought in mind, this next poem I'm going to read is inspired by the character Godzilla. It's titled Cherenkov Light. And what Cherenkov Light is it is essentially a bluish hue that is the result of charged particles passing through a transparent medium like water, for example. So if you look in like nuclear reactors, like there is a Cherenkov, like this eerie bluish Cherenkov light. And it's called Cherenkov Light because it was discovered by Pavel A. Cherenkov in 1934. So another strange thing about this collection, there are footnotes throughout it because I want to help connect the dots for some of these things because they're pretty specific references. So Cherenkov Light. Sometimes the monster we see ourselves as is the product of an unnatural pressure, the result of careful studies conducted by bystanders in hazard suits, staring in through distant monitors, observing our calculated meltdowns and our borated water baths, soaking euphoria through our membranes when our fission becomes too dangerous for a world that marvels at our resilience. If we could see that internal energy we generate in this captivity powers their cities, we'd rise like leviathans from these subterranean prisons. We'd burst forth with a wrath unseen, Godzilla wild, cast our eerie Cherenkov light on the world, and reveal the lumbering beasts we've been made to be. So that poem specifically is about bullying and how those of us who've been bullied are basically just subjected to this constant pressure, like we're sitting at the bottom of a nuclear reactor. And because we start to internalize what these bullies say, we self-deprecate, and we in a way turn into monsters ourselves. At least that's how we perceive ourselves, you know. So, yeah. So, um the next piece that I am going to be performing for you tonight is a piece titled Cyberpunk Undead. Um, oh, thank you, Heather. That means a lot. I know a lot of people can definitely relate with bullying, for sure, and recovering from it. This poem, Cyberpunk Undead. Okay, so there is a fictional character that has been developing throughout this collection. I decided to incorporate a fictional character that I created. And it so happens to be the character on the front cover. Um, Shout out to my artist, Seth Stang, for creating this wonderful piece. Um, and I'll explain to you a little bit more about this character in just a moment. But this poem was inspired by this character's impressions of a dystopian, desolate world around him. But it also serves as a metaphor for, of course, how have felt as a gay man post coming out in a lot of situations. So, Cyberpunk Undead. Now that I am finally seen, the cities flee at the way my alloy glints through the smog, beneath the half-lit neon signs of vacant clubs, defunct shops, and cracked church cherubs. Some thought me a monster and flocked to curbsides to preach the end times, while others gazed in pity from their balconies at the mangled contraption in their streets, half welded. I've lost track of the years trudging through each city, across each desert plain, and beneath the vast, depleted forests. I've seen the ages pass into oblivion, the tide flow of division, yet here I am, a figment of their industrial hell, outliving their flasks of holy water, now evaporated, their smoke-choking factories now crumbling. I've survived the naysayers, the fearmongers, the religious dread, and now I've accepted this involuntary reanimation into a cyberpunk undead. It's kind of like my first rebellious poem of the collection. There's a lot of rebellious poems in here. When I was first coming out, I was like this angsty, emo, gothy creature, and I envision this character as being what we angsty, emo, gothy creatures end up growing up into. Just a thought, though. Oh, goodness. Ryan says that recovering from bullying is never an easy road, but you're definitely not alone. Thank you for that. Yes, I agree 100%. So, the next piece that I am going to read is the final poem in the first section of my book, The Involuntary Reanimation. And it is a poem titled My Therapist is a Bumper Sticker. And this poem was inspired by a visit to Mackinac Island, which is up north in Michigan, a very touristy place. I ended up buying bumper stickers, and I found this bumper sticker that said "Exist loudly," and it just spiraled into a poem. So I wanted to perform it for you today. I also found out that this poem was recently nominated for the Pushcart Prize by my publisher, which really means a lot to me. My therapist is a bumper sticker. Jagged wreckage juts skyward from this uneven desert plain, like mangled fingers, reaching from a dystopian horror long forgotten, buried in decaying heaps. Wind whips rivers of sand between these wasteland obelisks as I, rusted and desperate, trudge around each obstacle in this dismembered city, seeking some disembodied purpose. As my lumbering hulk rounds another corner, an oxidized Chevy bumper glints beneath the exhausted afternoon and reveals a sign that's withstood these unspoken cataclysms. Exist loudly, it says, faded and tattered, on a relic outlasting words inscribed on mountain sides, eroded faces carved in sacred places, and decayed pipes snaked beneath lake beds. The words have outlived the hands that wrote them. Somewhere beneath this twisted rubble, the old political signs are buried, and the hate flags are now desiccated while I, reborn in this form, relearn how to live in this world again. When I was writing this piece, I couldn't help thinking about what the world would be like long after humanity's gone. So this cyborg character that I created is kind of like my own way of envisioning myself in that position, right? What would the world be like eons from now when all that's left of us are just piles of debris or crumbling buildings, you know? All the hate that existed in the world would cease to exist, terrifyingly enough. When really we have the power for that hate to be completely, you know, subverted now. So, there is a series of poems throughout my collection. For some reason in this collection, I wanted a specific series of poems following a theme. And these poems are titled Queer Confessions. They are largely love poems, but they also are confessions from the LGBTQ perspective post coming out about, finding love, acceptance, navigating the difficult things in the world around us right now. And I'm going to be performing a few of those for you tonight. So this first one is titled Queer Confession number 5. I wrote this one during the pandemic, like, right in the middle of lockdown, so if this one isn't obvious about that, I don't know what will be. The window is still damp from the last time I stood too close, waiting to watch you coast into the driveway. The airtight rooms in this house are catacombs without you here, while outside the world keeps its strength to spin in the hum of each passing car, in the hollow wind pressing through naked trees, in the grass as it struggles to keep its green, nestled between the jagged snow continents melting in the yard. These afternoons stretch into ages when you're gone, but somehow I stave off the empty house from swallowing me whole in knowing you're coming home to me. I had to throw a mushy poem in there, of course, because that's what I do. One of these days, I'm just going to do an entire collection of nothing but gay love poems. Because why not? So, well, we are about halfway through the pieces. Got a few more. We have a few more to go. Oh, Tiffany, thank you. I appreciate that. All right. I've been kind of loathing performing this one because it's going to be really hard to perform. I've been practicing it, but we'll see what happens. So, this poem was titled Solus Arcane, and the word solace is a Latin word meaning alone, and it so happens to be the name of the character on the front of my book. His name is Solus Arcane. And this poem places the reader in the perspective of being the cyborg experiencing the world for the first time after being brought back to life or reanimated of sorts, if that makes sense. So, Solus Arcane. Synaptic Recall Activation Sequence Automated Unit SA0001. Lab lights lit my first sight upon waking, my disarray splayed across the metal table. Synaptic Recall Activation Sequence Automated Unit SA0001. Recall error. A cloaked figure's hand hovered over my head, enchanted in one of the old languages. Synaptic Recall Activation Sequence Automated Unit SA0001. Memory Decay. As the gears began to turn, my vision shifted into ultraviolet. Then data spilled into this cranial shell like a breached dam. Synaptic Recall Activation Sequence Automated Unit SA0001. Fragmentation Reclamation. Finally, the system reboot provided me purpose, a direction, a goal my prior life never had. Synaptic Recall Activation Sequence Automated Unit SA0001. File corrupt. After deactivation, I woke up swallowed in the scrap heap, with no memory of that purpose, no sight of souls remaining. Synaptic Recall Activation Sequence Automated Unit SA0001. Memory irretrievable. The alchemist is gone. The littered roads ahead. And now I'm Solus Arcane. That past life is dead. When I wrote that piece, I was thinking a lot about trauma as well. Trauma has a very strange impact on a lot of people, and especially memory. And it was my hope that I captured that with that poem. Not gonna lie, that was one of the most difficult poems to write as well. because I really wanted to capture like this artificial mechanization if possible. Well, if you thought that one was nerdy, just wait till you hear this one. This one is extremely nerdy. Thank you, by the way, in advance for handling my nerdiness. I really appreciate it. So there is another series of poems in my book themed around specific characters from Godzilla films, doctors slash mad scientists, notably. And I love these characters dearly, and I wanted to bring them to life in these poems while also creating commentary about mental health and all sorts of different things. This poem is titled Shiragami, and it is named after the character Dr. Genichiro Shiragami from the 1989 film Godzilla vs. Biollante, which is my favorite film. And to provide you some context, this doctor is recruited by the Japanese government. P.S. Spoilers for Godzilla vs. Biollante if you have never watched it. I guess close your ears if you don't want spoilers. But this character is recruited by the Japanese government to use Godzilla's cells, which have regenerative capabilities, to create an anti-nuclear energy bacteria which would defeat Godzilla. And, of course, fix nuclear pollution, right? What a grand idea. And throughout this film, there are tragedies, especially toward the beginning. His daughter, who is I think she's a geneticist, if memory serves me correctly. He's also a geneticist, by the way. She ends up dying in a terrorist attack in this fictional country the movie creates. And she was experimenting with creating crops that could withstand desert climates. So Dr. Shiragami, grieving the loss of his daughter and having um, access and power to these restricted materials. Godzilla cells were restricted. I'm getting all animated here. Look at me. Godzilla cells were restricted because of how dangerous they were. And because it took place during Cold War times, this film notably, many different world powers were fighting to gain access to these. So he ends up using these cells to create what he thinks is going to be something good, but ends up being something worse. He combines Godzilla cells with the cells of a rose, which was Erica's, like his daughter's, favorite flower, and weaves in her own DNA and creates the monster Biolante, which arguably is kind of scary if you ever watched the film. So this is the poem Shiragami. The lab's been late. Let me start that over. The lab's been vacant for years now, but some nights I wonder if the alchemist responsible for my life preserved my soul in roses, or perhaps placed my spirit in a beast's sternum, because flowers never last in the hands of humans. Perhaps my rebirth was the vision of a desperate man, clinging to the life I lived long ago, the fevered dream of extending existence past its expiration, a defiance of decay and the natural spin of this torpid world. In all reality, my body was likely the obsession of a mad scientist, a grief-stricken father aiming to make the world's eighth wonder, to preserve my biotic history in these hyperactive cells, dividing and regenerating, never knowing that I've become the titan he feared, existence incarnate, a world wonder warped into wrath. Megan's here. Hello. Oh, Tiffany, that's like the best compliment I've ever received. You would be an excellent narrator for Audible. Well, my goal is to do Audible versions of my books. So that has the potential to be a reality, and hopefully it does become a reality. I would love that very much. So, there's about 5 more poems left. This poem is another one of the queer confession pieces, and while Solus Arcane, the prior poem that I shared about, was very difficult to write, I would argue this one was the most difficult. It's probably the most personal poem for me because it definitely hones in on the perspective of being LGBTQ post coming out, and it illustrates many of the different things that I've had to navigate. So, this poem is titled Queer Confession Number 7. Few fathom how we dreamed, how our teenage summers were spent calculating compatibility with straight boy crushes, crafting domestic scenarios where we lived the lives of our friends who were voted most popular, voted best couple, destined to sway through smoky high school gymnasiums as prom royalty. Few fathom how we dreamed, how we doodled our names next to theirs in sad diaries hidden from parental eyes, how we filled our vacancies with heroic Prince Charmings, kingly Aragorns, or anime heartthrobs because each trail of dream crumbs kept our heads above water, kept us breathing. Few fathom how we dreamed, how we smiled our way through each friend's wedding, wondering if our turn was in the cards, or if we should marry our careers for the security of belonging. Because each mounting rejection filled our interiors with a cement, keeping us grounded to the reality we always knew. Few fathom how we dreamed, how we secretly wondered if each friend's setup, blind date, or hookup might lead us to the one. Like the ending to every romantic comedy we had attended as the fifth wheel, carefully playing our role as the sarcastic comic, staving the craving for connection. Few fathom how we dreamed, how our roaring 20s were spent playing catch up. A frantic mania deepened with each wedding invitation, baby shower announcement, and house closing, while we still linger in our one room studios and lay our dreams to rest like saints. Few fathom how we dreamed, how we survived our marriages to material, to careers, how we continue to quake in flickering, half filled bars, to chase our original highs, because the dreams we've placed in museums have warped into mausoleums, a resolve to honor the youth we've laid to rest. Few fathom how we dreamed, how long it's taken to gather ourselves to celebrate the way our broken pieces shine, despite the way these pressure cracks spider across the edges of our eyes, a line for each smile we've stapled as a mask to mask our lack of mask. Few fathom how we dreamed, how surprised we become when we find someone, because the way their smiling eyes fills us, fills our plutonium interiors with the warmth of sun, seems unreal because when we dance for the first time in the quiet of our bedrooms, we pretend to sway at the prom we should have had, that we deserved. Few fathom how we dreamed, how we'll travel any length to find each other because no distance compares to the parsecs of shame we navigate. Isolation in an interstellar vacuum. I really wanted to illustrate with that poem how the small things that a lot of people tend to deem as small are actually big things for us. Going to prom, um, getting married. They're very big things for us because we've spent so long not believing that we'd find them or have them. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. So now we are at the final section of my book. Yes, the last few poems have been within the two middle sections. We are now on to the section titled The Cyborg's Gone Rogue. This first piece is titled When I Come Home, and I wrote it inspired by decay, ultimately. The small town where I'm from um, is just this very interesting microcosm of all the troubling things that are happening in our world, all the troubling views and standpoints, um, and oftentimes I don't feel safe or welcome there because of it. So when I travel home, because I've been so far from that small town for so long, it just things look like they've decayed or declined with the passage of time. So this poem is titled When I Come Home. When I come home, I travel between the bends in pavement rivers and follow the sunset as it dips toward white pine tree lines whose tightened arms threaten to swallow the day. When I come home, a sullen beast crawls into my sternum and steers my eyes toward all things derelict. A rusted tractor overgrown in the field, unsure of its color, the fresh tree stumps left from a summer storm, the twisted deer carcass tossed along the roadside, and the decaying houses left by families who haven't seen each other since the deaths of grandparents. When I come home, tattered Confederate flags hang on naked limbs just outside the somnolent town, framed by the sloped silhouettes of weathered hills, the same old mountains who've known history long before us. When I come home, the cats slink to their food bowls, no longer thrilled by the hunt, and my tired parents retired to their ends of the house. And I, seeing these places through teenage eyes, walk these trails with a hope that memories never die. It's funny because despite all the decay that I see when I travel back to this place that's very important to me, because my hometown is very dear to me, I walk forest paths and I walk through town with the same eyes that I had as a teenager, I feel. Yes, I see this decay, but I still see it through the eyes of, I guess, hope, if that makes sense. So, whew, my tea's almost gone. I better make the rest of this tea last, my friends. So, are you ready for a romantic love poem? A super gay romantic love poem. So this poem is Queer Confession number 9, and I dedicate it to my partner, Britton. And it's essentially a reflection on how far we've both come as LGBTQ plus individuals, how much we've like survived, and how many disappointments we've survived until finding each other ultimately, and somehow making all of this work, right, despite adversity and so many different things. Queer Confession number 9, dedicated to my partner. Some days I mistake this routine we have as a fever dream. The way you wake up first, then me, then silently share our cups of coffee. Some days I mistake this household and all we have as a mirage, only a make-believe reverie born in a rom-com montage, trapped in television or perhaps a photo collage. Some days I mistake the way our families smile at who we've become because it reminds me that we are the sum of our experiences, of everything we've overcome. Some days I mistake this happiness as an elaborate simulation, a crafted world built on a need for a Disneyed stimulation, based on a holodeck driven by a computer's stipulation. Some days these mistakes fall away as you walk in the front door, home from work, greeted by the footfalls of our pets across laminate floor. Because home is wherever you are, a reality I can't ignore. By the way, sorry if you hear background noise. I think there's a helicopter going ahead outside. This poem means a lot to me. And it's like truthfully, I've been wanting to really capture what I see each small thing we experience in the form of um, this poem. And I hope you enjoyed it. Yeah. Two more poems, my friends. And then a Q&A. I hope you have some questions for me because I'm going to answer some questions. Okay? All right, so this is the final queer confession poem. Queer confession number 10. It's a poem separated into 3 sections. I know. I'm obsessed with dividing things into sections. I can't help it, but I need to categorize things. And essentially, again, this is a kind of an overview poem of my impressions of what I've experienced as an LGBTQ plus person post coming out, and what I think a lot of LGBTQ plus people may be able to relate with. Queer confession number 10. Number 1. The forgotten era. For many of us, the life we'd like to live is a mirage looming behind heat ripple walls, as our desert thirst for belonging started the first time we found comfort in hiding. For many of us, the life we live is spent marching to the beat of dating app notifications or consumed by long drives to meet dates who never show. For many of us, the disappointments mount in our memories like resume entries, ready to recount at every uncertain date, a new job to pay the emotion tax society takes. For many of us, our wandering 20s become the forgotten era, the time spent on a sojourn for a belonging we never were allowed to have. 2. The final boss. For many of us, our search of belonging becomes a video game to cope as lovers come and go like pixelated character sprites passing through our worlds. For many of us, each level mounts in difficulty, but we grow accustomed to navigating dystopian landscapes with weapons forged in self-deprecating humor, the strongest steel. And for many of us, the final level is in sight when the prospect of happily ever after is near. But the final boss is stronger than we expect when we realized the last fight is with ourselves. Number 3, the season finale. For some of us, the wait becomes worthwhile when we put ourselves out there again after a disappointing decade story arc with few to no character developments. For some of us, the belonging feels alien in the otherworldly realization that someone actually sees us for who we are and bonds with us over our long journeys. For some of us, we never knew who we were before, but now our hearts are held like holy relics in the palms of their hands, and soon we discover that love can feel like magic again. Kind of a love poem, kind of an existential crisis. They kind of go hand in hand. Let's be honest. Oh, thank you, Tiffany. Oh, that means a lot to me. We artists are always apologizing. It's one of the great artistic weights that we carry, unfortunately. All right, are we ready for the last poem? The last poem is Feats of Alchemy, the title poem of my collection. And essentially, it is the cyberpunk discovering who he is, the LGBTQ plus person finding self-acceptance. Feats of Alchemy. When machines return to base, they are no longer automatons. They are mechanisms with purpose, droids with severed umbilical strings. Now that the creator's programming has expired, we cyborgs have gone rogue and wear our rust like rouge because decay is back in style. There's a point in all our travels when we return to crumbled birthplaces, defunct laboratories once home to our involuntary reanimations. After all these years, we strut atop the rubble that remains, free from the hands of mad, power-bent alchemists, dancing until our titanium feet erode the remnants with each stride forward, never looking back. As our memory ports swell with synaptic sparks, the traumatic past is archived for safe display, and each word they spat is broken down into code, then purged from this memory of old. Let the acceptance of who we've become fuel the seeds we scatter across this world. Ignite the knowledge that not every monster destroys. Not every cyborg assimilates the innocent. Because deep within our biology, we see that our magic lives in these feats of alchemy. These feats of alchemy are the things we navigate every day. It could be something as small as we LGBTQ plus people changing our tone of voice to fit into a group of people. It could be a person in a toxic relationship sacrificing who they are for someone else who is abusive. It could be a person completely containing their identity, not acknowledging who they are. That's like the fact that we can go through those things and find ourselves on the other side. That is an alchemy of sorts. We're taking pain and turning it into power, because alchemy is turning one thing into something else. And I believe that survival is a collection of different feats of alchemy. Bam, now you know what the title's about. All right, you coaxed me. I'll read one more poem. Last minute decision. This poem is dedicated to those in the LGBTQ plus community who are not out yet. No matter the age, the identity, it's okay to not be out yet. And it's important for individuals to come out when they feel the time is right. This poem is titled, "This Closet is a Chrysalis." Dear kid, you're not out, and that's okay. Because one day you'll go from pacing gravel driveways to marching down cobblestone paths beneath marble archways. Your jagged root feet will reach for us when you're ready to take in the rich, historic nutrients left by their stories, by your ancestors' legacies. This closet is a chrysalis, so swaddle these starched linens until they wrap your wings for when they're ready to unfold. Then let the spark that is your pride ignite. Let your core spin with delight as you're the next light in this spectrum, a new star born in this stellar nursery. And that's it. Wow, I performed 14 poems. This is the longest reading, well, the most poems I've ever done in a reading. So, all right, my friends. So, I am open for a good maybe 10 minutes of questions if anybody has any questions. I am ready to answer questions about this book, about identity, about life, about the individual poems. My camera keeps getting blurry. There we go. Oh, Megan, thank you. And Arpy, thank you for that as well. So there's a lot of like I love putting so many small things in a collection where it requires multiple reads to kind of break everything down. If you read the disclaimer at the beginning of my book, I do note that people should read read the book slowly. Don't read it all in one sitting because there's a lot to process. There is a lot of poems about trauma, poems about a bunch of different things. And I think it should be a paced process for sure. And Ryan, that's totally okay. Um, Ironically, my partner has not seen any of the love poems from Feats of Alchemy yet. He will. He will. Ooh, we got some good questions. Okay, so that was Arby's question. Arby's question was, how did your partner react to the poems you wrote for him? He'll see them. He'll see them. I will tell you that in Carbon Footprint, he loved the poem Snow Day because that was gifted to him, I think, for Valentine's Day. My dear friend Ryan asks, what's your creative process, Donny? Are you a daily writer or do you write when inspiration strikes? Ooh, that's a good question. I go through stints, let's just say. I will go through stints where I will write regularly, daily, like over the summer, especially like when I had the pressure of finishing Feats of Alchemy. I would write at least one poem a day, or at least revise and edit a poem per day. And that usually kept me on track. It kept my creative juices flowing. I really think that our creative mind is a muscle. Like we have to exercise our creative aspects in order to keep them strong. So I kind of think of that as my like daily workout routine, like mentally, creatively. But I will say the past few weeks, I have not written a lot. I've written a couple of poems, but not a lot. I've been trying really to focus on taking a little bit of a creative break to recharge a bit, focus on marketing for Feats of Alchemy, so on and so forth. So, but when inspiration does strike, I always make sure that I keep a notebook nearby. Like this little thing right here, the journal that I wrote my poems set list in. This is my poetry journal. I always keep this nearby. I keep my phone nearby. I will put in like voice memos, or I might message myself something on Facebook, like if a word or a line comes to me. That's part of my process. Ryan says, I probably missed you talking about this, and since I haven't had a chance to read yet, can you speak to the influences you received from Evanescence's album, The Bitter Truth? Yes, I've been waiting for someone to ask this question. Okay. I love Evanescence a lot, as many of you know. They are a band whose music has kept me alive on many different difficult occasions. And I reference at least, let me look here. P.S. This book has a references page, which is another very untraditional thing that collections typically don't have, um, along with footnotes. I reference at least 3 different Evanescence songs, 2 of them from The Bitter Truth, but truthfully, there were many others from The Bitter Truth that inspired me as well. But the album The Bitter Truth, which is Evanescence's recent album that came out early this year, it to me is very much themed around how we take the pain that we've experienced and turn it into power, how we survive that pain. And there is a lyric in a song specifically that I'm thinking of that really was central to this book from the song Part of Me. And it's I Am Not My Survival. At least I believe. Yes, that was from Part of Me. Evanescence fans can correct me if I'm wrong, but since I'm put on the spot here, it's like, um, but I really resonated with the message of the declaration of I am not my survival. My survival is simply part of me, right? Ooh, that was kind of a pun, but it gave me goosebumps. Um, but in the song "Broken Pieces Shine," which is also referenced in this, um, "Survival hurts" is a lyric that really resonated with me, and for many people in the LGBTQ plus community, survival is very painful. Um, and sometimes our survival drastically shapes who we are, the connections we make, the connections we sever, so on and so forth. Um, and that's, I would argue, how the bitter truth influenced me. And I'm very grateful that it did. I also wrote a lot of the poems in this listening to the song Far From Heaven by Evanescence, but I didn't reference any of the specific lyrics from it. But truthfully, it should also be on my references page. Ryan says, I have broken down several times to those lyrics. Yes, same. Same. Heather asks, I have heard you explain why Godzilla is inspiring to you. There are poems in this book about scientists from Godzilla movies. What inspires you about these scientists? What inspires me about these scientists is the fact that each of them experience some sort of loss that they either come back from or fall prey to. And a lot of people assume that in Godzilla movies that Godzilla is the villain when really it's humanity, oftentimes it's the villain. And sometimes that villain takes the shape of some of these scientists. Not all of them, mind you. Like most of these scientists, I would argue, are tragic characters. They embody a lot of humanity, which I think is extremely interesting. And I think that they deserve more attention. I, in general, think that the Godzilla franchise in general deserves more attention because um, it connects so much to socio-political shifts in this world, and it's so interesting. So interesting. So, I would argue that that is what inspires me about the scientists, but also the kaiju, the monster characters inspire me. Godzilla, Mothra, so on and so forth. There are a few poems in here outside of the scientist poems that are that reference Godzilla. Yeah. RP, yes, that's totally okay. Any other questions? I'm having fun. And my tea's not gone yet, so I'm still at your disposal for questions. While I'm waiting for questions, after oh my gosh, after writing Feats of Alchemy, I was just so exhausted. Like, finishing up the book and submitting it, it literally felt like a birth or a rebirth that took place. I will be more than my survival, yes. Own these scars on my heart. Oh, I love that lyric. I could get that tattooed to me. Damn it, maybe I will. I love that so much. I've been sipping, sipping very slowly. For those of you who have not gone and subscribed to Brotherwell Music, please do. Because my dear friend who operates Brotherwell Music has been turning some of my poems into songs. And we are working on a project titled Recovery. Heather is also working with me on this project. So is my friend Ari, who also does YouTube videos with me. So go check those out. How old were you when you wrote your first poem? And what was the topic? That's a good one. I was probably my first finished poem that I was proud of, I would say, um, was written in early high school in a creative writing class. And it was titled Orange Begins and Ends the Day. I love the color orange, and I basically wrote a poem about sunsets and sunrises, because my love of poetry began with writing nature poems. So I think I have that buried somewhere. I need to really revive my old series on here titled The Old Poem Reliquary, and maybe read that poem. We'll see. Oh, RP, thank you. The poem In Memoriam, yes. Um, I would argue part of it, yes, was inspired by some Linkin Park music. Uh, which, by the way, these are songs that RP's referencing, Linkin Park songs. But I really wanted to focus on um, the loss of a colleague whom I really didn't know very well, Dr. Dennis Gray. Like, it was such a sad day. Like, he took his life, and it was a very dark day on my campus. And I wanted to honor him in some way. Oh, Tiffany. Yay, thank you. That's such a compliment for me. I'm glad that I was able to inspire you to pull out your creative poetry journal from college. Tiffany is a very talented writer, by the way. I love both poetry and fan fiction. All right, I'll do one more question, make it a doozy. By the way, while I am waiting for one more question, I have 2 more poetry readings planned over the next few months. Next month, I'm going to be doing a poetry reading with Pages Promotions. In January sometime, I'm going to be doing a poetry where I just read the Queer Confession selections from Feats of Alchemy. And then I am going to be doing a poetry reading where I just read all of the Godzilla poems. So I guess the convenience of having themed poems is now I've given myself the ability to do themed readings. So I'm super excited about that. And you were all invited to those, of course. So, one more question, anyone? I know it's a challenge. It can be there's a lot of pressure with one more question. One more question. So while I'm waiting for one, One of my students emailed me the other day and was like, "Professor Winter, I bought your book. I didn't know you wrote your books." Um, or I didn't know you wrote poem books. And had this realization that I don't really broadcast it to my students at all, but like the students seemed like super excited, and I'm like, maybe I should start just talking about it a little bit more, talking about the fact that I have written these because I really think that it might help inspire some students to put your work out there. Oh my goodness. Heather, this is a good question. Ooh, challenging question. If you could meet any poet, living or dead, who would it be? Hmm. I I would love to meet J.R.R. Tolkien because yes, he was a fiction writer, but he was also a very talented poet, and his poetry is often overlooked. Hands down, J.R.R. Tolkien. If I were to meet someone alive, I would love to meet Amanda Gorman, the poet who performed at the presidential inauguration earlier this year. She's so talented. Ryan, what kind of tea do you prefer? Um, I I have Tiffany cups to thank for this, but Lady Grey tea is my favorite tea, and that's what I was just drinking. It's so delicious. It's like very citrusy, but not like overwhelmingly citrusy. And I always take it with a little bit of honey. And I try to drink tea when I'm doing readings because, reading can be very taxing on the throat, on the voice. But yes, Ryan, I also find it very relaxing. And I also drink it when I'm feeling creative. um, RB, thank you. I really appreciate that. Last question. This is my last question from my dear friend from Brotherwell Music. What was the hardest poem to write in this collection? Again, I think Queer Confession number 7. Um, there were a lot of poems in Carbon Footprint that were difficult to write, but I really placed myself in a lot of vulnerable situations with Feats of Alchemy because it talks a lot about LGBTQ plus experiences post coming out. Some of those experiences are very recent for me. And that poem, like I remember when I tried practicing it because I read it for a reading a few weeks ago. I couldn't get through it. I cried. I don't normally cry when I'm reading, but I cried like several times trying to read that poem, and I've gotten to a point where I can actually read it. But um, again, at the end of the day, my goal, especially with those queer confession poems, is to just help draw awareness, help people see that, coming out isn't always the end result that makes things perfect. Coming out is great, but there are so many other things to navigate and overcome on our journeys. So, yeah. All right, my friends. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. It really means a lot that you came and listened to me read. If you watch this after the stream and you would like to comment, please do. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet. And if you would like to buy a copy of Feats of Alchemy, you can on Amazon. I have it both in hardcover and softcover books. And it will soon be available at Leopard Print Books, which is a local bookstore here, but it also has an online store as well. Anyway, I love you all. Be well, have a good night, and keep writing. I love you. Bye.